Right, welcome to the witness panel. So this is really exciting. I don't know that all three of these gentlemen have been together ever like this to talk in front of an audience.
No, we haven't.
Yeah, so this is really exciting. The first time ever, 40th anniversary of the event. We've got Mike Rodgers, John Goulette, and of course Travis Walton at the far end there. And we'll start off with some questions. Goulette?
Yes. Goulette.
Okay, John Goulette. So if you're asking questions. So we'll start off with Mike. And Mike, if you could grab the mic, I'd like to ask, when you came across the object in the forest, could you describe what it was that you saw and your reaction?
Well, I was probably the last one to see it because I was driving the truck, and the road was very hard to manage, very narrow. Yeah, it was a bad road. I had to keep my eyes on it, so I was the last one to see it, and I had to bend over and look down because it was above the roof of the truck, and that's when I saw it. And I'm sorry. I sound too loud when I do this.
That's a good thing.
Yeah, we're too close to the speaker.
I work off questions. I don't keep things rolling too good.
Oh, no problem. So what was it? Could you describe what it was you saw?
I don't know what it was we saw. I know what it looked like.
Mm-hmm. And what did it look like?
You know, it's what you might call a typical flying saucer shape, like two pipe hands placed lip to lip. It looked like a dome of some kind on top. The thing that I thought the most about it was that even though it was a very simple shape, it struck me as being very pretty. The color was pretty, the shape was pretty, and as simple as it was. And that struck me more than anything else. It was the color it was sort of white, off-white, but it wasn't glowing like a white light bulb. It was just a soft color, but it was very definite and very, very obvious. It had a structure to it. It has some kind of construction pieces behind it or something that it was broken up into panels. Maybe there was 20 panels or something that went around it, and the bottom was just a circle. I don't know how big it was, but the panels came up from that. Once we got up close to it, and Travis got out of the truck and went up to it, right at that point, I mean, but just as soon as I stopped the truck, I heard some noise coming from it. And I've never been able to describe the noise. I wouldn't even attempt to do it, but very different. And Travis did something there. He got it disturbed somehow, but it started moving and not moving around, but just kind of like turning into place. And the sound got louder, and apparently Travis got scared a bit from it because he had crouched down. I became apprehensive at that point and leaned over and turned the truck off. And just as I did, the whole woods up in front of me and behind the truck lit up brighter than day, kind of a bluish color, blue-green maybe. And I took off.
Right. So maybe, John, if you could describe what it was you saw in your words and how you reacted, how you felt.
Well, when I first saw the light through the trees, I thought it was the moon, but then I could see the moon over to the other side of the road. And then once we got up close and you could actually see what it was, it looked to me, like it was like kind of yellowish, and it was you know, like Mike was saying, you see the framework in it, you know, and it was, and to me it looked just perfect, you know, like it was, you know, like, I mean, just a perfect shape. You know, it was pretty scary looking at it. You knew, you know, you were way outgunned and all that, you know, it was just, you know, it was terrifying actually. And it wasn't very far away, you know, it was pretty close to us, and I had the view I had of it, Alan Dallas was sitting by the door, and I had to lean down and look through the window, so I didn't see the whole thing. I could see like the front half of it, you know, and because it was blocked in the front. And then I started to hear that noise that Mike was talking about, and so I got scared, and I turned, I looked the other way, and the woods behind there lit up all bluish green, you know, and then I looked back and I could see Travis just hitting the ground and crumpling up, you know, and his ways back from where I last saw him standing, you know. So it obviously it knocked him back a ways, you know. Mm-hmm. And that's about, you know. Mm-hmm. And then, like I said, when that hit him and started the truck, took off, you know. Mm-hmm. Yep. That was what I saw at that time.
Mm-hmm. So Travis, these guys are kind of awestruck. They're looking at the object, trying to figure out what's going on, and you run towards it. I guess the big question is, what the heck were you thinking? I mean, your thought process obviously was very different than theirs.
Well, I was awestruck too. As a matter of fact, I think the awestruck look on my face is what led Alan to say on TV, it was like hard copy or Inside Edition, one of those shows. He said it looked to him like I was just being drawn towards it, like I was compelled. And Steve thinks that, you know, I was like under mind control, but I didn't feel like I was under mind control. I was just mesmerized, you know, entranced by the beauty and the power of this thing and the fear. But I just thought it would take off before I got that close, and I just wasn't appreciating the danger.
Mm-hmm. So Mike, coming back to Mike again, if you can hand that back. So you guys took off, and obviously you were very afraid. At what point did your mind kind of kick back in, and you were thinking, uh-oh, now what?
My mind didn't do much of anything for a while there. It was a blind panic, seriously. I didn't drive too well. I mean, you know, I couldn't see. I remember that I couldn't see very well. My vision was blurry, and I remember hitting a tree, but with the side of the truck and knocking the mirror off. And I remember the guys in the truck all yelling and everything. It was crazy. I wouldn't even have stopped the truck a quarter of a mile away where I did, except that this road that went in there, had big humps of dirt in it. It was closed. They had closed it with cats when they got through logging. And we had to use the road anyway, so we had to go around these humps, and we had to take a shovel before we started that part of the job, and we actually had to build a road there, at least a path to get in around those humps. Anyway, as I was flying out of there, I took a wrong angle to one of the humps, and you can only cross it if you went just exactly in the right spot and the right angle. And I didn't do that, and so I hit the brakes real hard, so I wouldn't straddle myself in. And that's why we stopped. And I remember sitting there for a while, and I was trying to get my head together, but I couldn't think of anything. The other guys in the truck seemed to be doing a better job of it. They were at least saying things that I wasn't. It took me a couple of minutes to do anything, and I had to get out of the truck to think. And when I did, as I got out of the truck, I looked back in that direction, which I'd been looking at a lot anyway, and saw a streak in the trees, just up and away, at an angle. And it was the same color as the UFO, and it just looked like it had left, I very quickly yelled at the guys, called attention to it. Steve saw it. He said he did. Did you see it, Jim? You saw it? Okay. We were only a quarter of a mile away, and so I can understand how we would see it. That a quarter of a mile away, it isn't completely covered by trees.
Mm-hmm. In the movie, there was kind of this moment where, the character playing you is saying, hey guys, we got to go back. If you want to come back, fine. If not, if you're too afraid, that's fine too. Did anything like that really happen?
Yeah, just like that. The only difference between what really happened in the first movie, made a couple cents, thank God. In real life, if anybody's seen that paranormal witness program, that was really the way it happened. That's very, very close. The other movie, the All-Star movie, was way off. I'm sure they tried, but it really wasn't close. In that movie, they had everybody electing to stay at the side of the road. In reality, everybody went back. So that's quite a departure there, But let John here explain some of the chaos that went on there.
Well, everybody in the truck. I was in the back seat of the truck, and I could hear everybody yelling, and every single one of them was yelling, "Well, let's go get help!" And same time, and then they yell, "Well, we got to go back and get him," and then they kept, back and forth. It just, and as Mike said, there wasn't nobody staying out there in the dark beside the road by themselves, when he took off with the truck. You might have said you had a choice, but you really didn't, So we all went back with him. I think you parked your truck where the headlights were shining on the clearing zone, and then we got out. I think we only had that one light. And we kind of walked around the perimeter looking for Travis. And,
Who held the light? I don't know.
Oh, now, I thought you did. So you were the one in the lead.
So how did you feel when you couldn't find Travis?
Oh, man.
I was really scared, and not just for Travis, I was scared for me, because I thought, shoot, there ain't nothing you can do about this. If they come back, I'm in trouble. And then on the way to the phone booth, to call the sheriff, I started thinking, well, man, yeah, what are they going to think? They're not going to believe a word of this, and they're going to be looking at it a different way, and they sure did.
Mm-hmm. So Chuck Ellison, who's here, who's going to be talking about this tomorrow, the first police officer you all talked to, that had to be a pretty tense moment. What were you thinking? What were you going to tell him when the police did arrive?
Well, yeah, Kenny's the one that did most of the talking to him. I don't think I talked to him at all, except telling him I wasn't going back out there. I'd take those other guys home, I don't think I talked to him, If you had everybody stand there talking to him, at once, I think that might happen a little bit, or several people trying to tell him at the same time, and then he can't understand what you're talking about at all.
So we first told Chuck Ellison.
Oh, we want to grab the mic and.
We first told Chuck Ellison when he came over, right? Before the sheriff got there.
I think so. Wait. Oh, I don't remember.
Well, he came over and talked to us first, and we pretty much told him everything. And the sheriff was on his way. He had to get here. And
Chuck Ellison was the deputy, right?
Ellison?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Yeah, we did tell him.
Yeah. And we waited for the sheriff, and then when the sheriff got there, then we really opened up. Had a little practice.
How did he react? Did you expect for them to believe you or not, or were you worried about that? And how did the police react to you?
Well, I didn't expect him. I didn't expect him to believe that. If it hadn't happened to me, I wouldn't have believed it. And I never gave much thought to him. Before that, so I didn't think they'd believe it.
So once you started getting in, it seemed like, you started to be the main suspects. I mean, was it similar to the movie where, Mike, you kind of took a leadership role amongst the group, or was that kind of created in the movie
Alan
too?
was the main suspect.
Well, and that,
It was the main suspect?
Who? Alan.
Well, who'd he say?
He said you. I don't know.
oh, not you in particular, but the entire group. I mean, it seemed like they suspected all of you. Oh, no, not John. He's like, what, me?
I thought you were talking to John.
Well, maybe Mike, if you could take the mic and,
See who you're talking to, because I'm way over here on the...
no, I mean, did you take a leadership role, like in the movie, to defend the group?
Well, yeah, I kind of did, because I was already their boss. I wasn't trying to be their boss, it's just kind of the way things worked out, during the lie detector test and all the time leading up to that. But like when we were out at the site in the search, I wasn't even with them. I was doing other things and talking to certain Forest Service guys, and you weren't even there, but...
I was there at the search.
Oh, you were at the search, okay. Who was at the search altogether? You and me and
Well, Kenny was there.
Ken was there.
Well, I know Alan went, didn't he? Didn't they?
I think that Steve was the only one who wasn't.
Yeah, Steve Pierce.
In the
was
search?
only one wasn't there. Yeah.
Okay, but it was you and Alan, and who didn't go back out there that night?
Wasn't it Duane? Me and Alan and Duane.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So some of you went out and some did not. Some went home. Is that correct?
Say what?
Some of you went out to look for Travis with the police, and then some
Right.
did not.
Right, that's what we were just trying to get figured out. I remember that night real well. It was very, very burned into my memory, but I couldn't quite remember which of the guys were there. And so apparently it was John and Alan and Duane Smith that didn't go out there that night. But during the search, everybody was there except Steve. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So in the movie, it looked like there was a lot of suspicion on you all, and you had this, lots of arguments with the police. Like in the clips here, you're yelling at the cops, and they're yelling back. I mean, was it like that? Was it a really difficult? Explain how that period of time was for you all.
If you're talking about during the lie detector test, we really did have a very serious argument with the sheriff and the polygraph man wasn't there when we started, but when he showed up and got into it, we kept it going. Who were the people driving that suspicious thing that got us all riled up was Alan. Alan's mom was there, and Steve's mom was there.
Yeah.
And those were only adults that were related to there. But they were instigating things.
Alan's mom, I believe. Was.
Yeah, more than anybody else.
Moms can be very protective.
Yeah. So, they didn't show that in the movie, but she was really the one that got that going and kept it going. I remember some of the things she said that got me going. But after a while, we got it all calmed down.
And she was probably mainly very frustrated with the police.
Well, yeah, I could understand what she was doing, but
Frustrated or distrusted?
yeah.
And so finally, when Travis did come back, what did you think when you heard that news?
You know me?
Either of you. Do you want to answer, John?
I don't think I knew I didn't know that night, I don't believe. I think I heard he came back, or I heard somebody talking about it. Nobody told me.
I don't think it was snow that night.
It was like the next night, and then after going through those, it was relief that he's back and relief that they're going to take the suspicion off us for murder, actually, and
Well, we'd already passed the lie detector test.
yeah, but
Even though you
No.
passed the test, did you have a feeling that kind of got you off the hook, or did you still kind of feel under the gun?
well, when the lie detector tests were over, yeah, then I thought there was a lot of relief to know that and what I was really worried about it because we're all putting our hands in our futures in the hands of this guy that we don't know, and you know, I mean, he turned out to be, you know, quite an honest person, but we didn't know that, you know, when we went to take the test. You know, it could have been, you know, like their way of setting us up. You know. I think that's what Alan's mom was upset about. 'Cause Alan had been quite a bit of trouble, you know, and she'd dealt with him through all that. Yeah, she's always trying
She was
to.
used to it, I think. She had many years practice at that.
Even when he was wrong. But that's why I think she was acting the way she did. And, you know, man, I didn't see Travis for some time after that.
How did you feel the next time you did see him?
Well, you know, it was great seeing him looking well, you know, and, you know, not, you know, something, you know, like something you'd like subtly noticed wrong with him, you know, or something, you know, like he's all there and he's not being controlled or something.
Yeah. Well, and Mike, you were part of the family, so how did you feel? How long had it been since you saw Travis, or when was it that you first saw him, and how did you feel about it?
I believe it was, I went down to Phoenix about the fourth day after he returned. Me and Ken Peterson went down, and I saw him and talked to him, but I didn't ask him to tell me what happened. He told me a little bit about it, but we weren't pushing him. We were just talking normally, normal talk, but it was pretty nice. Felt good.
Happy to have him back. So Travis, what was it like when you finally saw these guys? I mean, I think a lot of people feel like, you know, they took off on you. And people often I've heard ask you, well, how did you feel about that?
I never felt any of that. There was a little bit of recrimination from my family members, you know, how could you do that? But, you know, they just didn't understand the situation. And I never did. I think at times Mike probably thought I was adopting that attitude, you know, that I was being critical of him, but I never was. And I don't think any of that talk about, you know, should have just jumped out and run up there and grabbed me and pulled me away or something. You know, that's absurd. You know, that wouldn't have made any sense whatsoever. What Mike and the crew did was exactly what they should have done. Anybody with any common sense, you know, is not going to just say, okay, let's go get ourselves killed to pull this dead body away. You know, it just doesn't make any sense. No, I was unconscious, and
He asked, well, what if you were conscious and you saw us drive away? Would you feel differently? I think Mike is...
no, even then it'd probably be understandable, just because, you know, if they believed I was killed, that's sufficient right there.
So,
No, actually, that was heroic. For those guys to come back that soon, unarmed, when they thought I'd been killed, that was nothing less than courageous.
So maybe you could describe to the crowd, too, the circumstances about you returning, because Mike had to go to Phoenix to see you. So essentially, when you returned, why were you in Phoenix? Maybe you could...
I was in such bad shape. I was just, you know, hanging by a thread, really, you know. I could sort of maintain on the exterior, but, you know, various UFO investigators, you know, described me, you know, with similar words, you know, that I looked like a caged wildcat. I looked shell-shocked. I looked, you know, that it was something that was quite apparent from the outside, you know.
And so, Mike, you had brought up, and I was just wondering, do you feel any guilt for it? I mean, do you think Travis should have reacted differently?
Well, Travis couldn't react.
Or as far as being so forgiving?
No, I think what I did wrong is we should have we shouldn't have left. We should have found out what his condition was. I don't think that was heroic. Going back later, yeah, but still, we shouldn't have ever left.
Well, having been in this for a while, and I think the crowd would agree, most people agree with Travis that you did what you should have done. And maybe if people want to express that, is people... So let's go ahead and open this up for questions. People can start to line up at the back to ask some questions.
They got to go back to the microphone.
And at the time, yeah, they got to go back to a microphone right here.
Okay.
And you know what would be great is Travis's, I know your sons are here. I think people would like to hear, how this has been for them, if they wanted to go back to the microphone. But yeah, we got a question here.
Yeah, this is for Mike as well as Travis and maybe John. I'm really intrigued by the comment Mike just made about a structure that he saw and underneath the craft, because the typical sort of UFO craft image that I have, and many of us have studied this a little bit, is that it's smooth underneath. And yet you're talking about some kind of structure seen from below. What kind of structure was it? And if Travis got so close to it, did he see anything other than just a smooth surface underneath?
Are you addressing that to me first?
Yeah, I'd like to address you first, Mike, because you mentioned that, but also Travis, when he got close, did he happen to see it?
I have to admit that most of my, I painted that thing several times, and I was going from Travis's description because he got the best look at it, and because of drawing it, then it became ingrained in my mind. So I've got a real good picture of it now, but I never saw it in the beginning. But the shape that we all saw was what I've described, but it had a pan on the bottom, a round part. I don't know how big it was. It didn't look completely flat. It looked to be curved slightly. And the edges that came up from that, which we call the panels, that were dissected by these lines. The lines were fairly wide.
And the drawing that Travis showed just a little while ago was one that you did?
Uh-huh. Yes, I think so. I didn't see it for sure. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think you kind of misunderstood what he's talking about when they say structure. Up close, the non-glowing parts were dark. It wasn't like an actual framework, but it was the metallic areas that weren't giving off light that was just, they were lines separating these glowing areas, but it was all one smooth glass-like surface. The whole thing was smooth, the whole thing. And the bottom of it was fairly flat, just a very slight convex curve, just bulging outward very slightly.
Next question.
This question is directed to Mike, and I would like to know if you finished your contract with the Forestry Service that year, and if any of the crew members and you went back to work during that 5-day period, if you went back to work at all.
Nobody went back to work at all. I don't think any of these guys ever even did that kind of work again, except for Travis and I. Did you?
For your dad.
Oh, that's right, yeah. Yeah, John worked for my dad for a while. But I think, right afterwards, we didn't. Nobody did. I did not finish the contract, and none of us did. The contract was rebid the next year. A guy by the name of John Hammond got it, and he actually bid lower than I did. So I got all of my 10% retention money, but I had to wait until, I don't know, May or something before I got it.
Mm-hmm. Travis, I know, addresses this because some of the skeptics say, oh, you guys were just trying to get out of a contract. And Travis, I know you have a response to that, if you want to.
Well, actually, Mike's in a better position because he knew all the contract, and there's no way he would have ever imagined that any kind of a UFO story would have any effect on his contract whatsoever. And it was so obvious to anybody that did contracting that Mike just got the contracting officers themselves to sign affidavits saying this theory is just totally bogus. There's just no way that Mike would benefit from that at all. It was a loss. It would have, any idiot would have known it would be a loss for something like that to happen. There's no way you could have thought that that would gain you anything.
Let me make a couple of statements about that. A lot comes to mind hearing him talk about that. Basically, that they call that the contract motive scenario, and it was Philip Klass's more or less final scenario. I think he had about 9 altogether. He'd go from one to the next, and if one didn't work, the next one he'd try. Most of them were dispelled by the fact, and for instance, one particular thing that he made a big point about, took him 11 pages in his book to describe it, to make one point, and that point was dispelled by the simple fact that he had misquoted somebody. He had given the credit to the interviewer instead of to me. It's kind of complicated, but basically what it was Duane Walton, his brother, and I were interviewed by a guy named Fred Sylvanus, and we were camping out at the site. Duane Walton wanted to do that, and I went with him. And I think it was 2 nights that we camped up there, but late one evening, along about sunset, this guy showed up, and we didn't know who he was, but he wanted to interview us, so we did. And it lasted about an hour and a half, and during that time, I wasn't able to say a whole lot because Duane was very busy talking about it, and I know what Duane was doing. He was trying to make himself feel good about Travis's being gone. He was bolstering his own situation, trying to make himself think that Travis was okay. And if you knew Duane, you'd know why he would do that and his personality. But during this conversation, I said several things along the line that didn't get picked up too well by the recorder, but at the end, there was one statement, and Philip Klass used it exclusively. He said that what he said, Philip Klass said in his book, is that all during this conversation, this interview, there was only one person that showed any concern for Travis's well-being whatsoever, and that was Fred Sylvanus, the interviewer. When Duane said that Travis, he thought his brother was having the experience of a lifetime, and he didn't have any fear for his life or anything. And I said, "You hope he has." Phil Klass gave that statement to Sylvanus so that he could say that I didn't have any concern for Travis whatsoever, And that's how quickly that one thing got dispelled. And all the rest of it was the same thing. As far as the contract motive scenario is concerned, which was usually the last thing and the biggest thing and the thing that they kind of hung on, Philip Klass basically was saying that it was a bad contract. He didn't have anything to base that on. He was saying it was a very low price, which is really weird because we had already been working on it for 2 years. And we were going to run out of time, but you have to understand that the Forest Service didn't just cut people off because they ran out of the original time. They tried to keep track of it. They tried to push them. They had to do that. There are people who just take all the time in the world. But there was no problem with getting another extension, and the price wasn't bad. It was one of the best contracts I had, actually. And to prove that was that this guy, John Hammond, that got it the next year, finished it up in almost exactly the amount of time I said it would have taken us, if we'd have gotten another extension. And he did it for, I think, $8 per acre less. And Phil Klass actually made up that entire scenario, literally.
Yeah, but we did the hard part first.
Yeah, that's right. What he doesn't tell people is that we not only did it, we weren't going to get that 10% retention until months later. It wouldn't matter. The act of God had nothing to do with it. In fact, there wasn't even an act of God contract in that, or clause in that contract. Yeah, he just made that up. I mean,
And there was, Mike never brought it up.
Want to use a mic?
The default procedure. It was never even discussed. So there was no attempt to use such a thing.
So meaning that the theory is there is an act of God clause and that this UFO experience was your alleged act of God.
Yeah, that's what he was trying to
To
say.
get out of
But
the
see,
contract.
Phil Klass was an atheist, and that was especially ironic for him, because he thought the whole idea was ridiculous,
Next question?
What do you estimate the diameter of the UFO to be? And why do you think it picked the Sitgreaves Forest to visit?
Well, my personal estimation would be anywhere from 20 to 40 feet. I don't know, because, when you look at the size of things in the city, you have something to compare it to. You know how big a car is or how tall a house is, but out in the woods, all you have is trees. And a big tree is exactly like a little tree, only scaled up. So, it's just an estimation kind of thing. We used to have kind of contests to guess the diameter of a tree from a distance, and it's hard to do.
There's some common illusions that you can use to understand that with. People look at these billboards on the side of the road and they think that they're like 4 feet by 8 feet or maybe, 5 by 10 or something. They're actually 10 by 40. I know, I was in the business for a while. And, there's all kinds of illusions in that sizing of things. And what he's saying is correct. You can't judge how big something is. He was very close to it, but he said even as close as he was, 10 or 20 to 40 feet. And from where I was, it looked like 3 to 6 feet. But it's just
When
weird.
you're close to something round, your eye is bisecting.
That's right.
But that's not actually the far edge on either side. When you go like this, you're marking these 2 points when the actual diameter is out here, because it's hidden by the curvature of it.
He talks loud enough to hear me.
Yeah, Travis, use the microphone. The second part of the question was, and maybe I know Travis might have thought about this, is why the Sitgreaves Forest? Why there?
I don't think there's any special reason that it would be the Sitgreaves National Forest. I just think that these kinds of things have a tendency to occur more in remote areas, and that's pretty remote, especially at that time. I've heard many stories from around the world, and although it can happen in very heavily populated areas, there's certain kinds of things that happen out in remote areas.
I've got a thought on that.
Okay, here.
I keep forgetting about the mic. If you were not considering cities, if you didn't consider a lot of things that we think is important, we think that our population centers are what's important, and to us it is. If you're out in space and just throwing darts at the Earth, 99% of the darts would hit in rural areas, wouldn't they?
Or water.
Or water, yeah. There's a lot of reports on water too. But if you were shooting just for land and you weren't aiming for cities.
If it was totally random.
Yeah, if it was totally random, that's right. I just thought.
Next question?
I have 2 comments. The first one, I want to thank all of you for coming here and sharing your stories and your experience with all of us. And then the second comment is to what you were discussing earlier about feeling bad that you drove away at all. And it's my belief that if you had stayed and gotten Travis's body, it would have been a fatal mortal wound, and Travis would not be here today, and none of us would be here today over this
that
beautiful...
could very well be true.
And we wouldn't get to hear all of the speakers, and I thank you, Travis, or whoever put this together this weekend. I really appreciate all the effort that went into it and all of the people that came out to speak, and I look forward to the rest of the weekend.
That never occurred to me.
Next question.
This is addressed to any of you, and it's more of a philosophical, spiritual question. How has this altered your belief in a higher power, in God? Changed it? Changed you?
I don't see any reason why it couldn't be the same God in many different planets. You know, if that's what you believe in, I don't see why it couldn't be. You know, why would it be just this planet? You know, he could have created life everywhere. You know, which I guess a lot of people do believe. You know, yeah. I mean, I think it might have affected Kenny in a spiritual way, you know, that struck him a little deeper than like it did me, you know, not being as much of a believer as Kenny was, you know. I think it might have affected him that way.
Mike, did you want to address that question?
Where's Ken? It didn't change my beliefs at all. I was a Jack Mormon, and I remained one.
Travis, were you affected spiritually?
Well, I do have to say that I think it increased my spiritual attitudes and thinking, my musings, my philosophizing, but it didn't intensify my religious in terms of like going to church for answers, because I knew I had to look beyond that, you know, to in myself and beyond the kinds of considerations that might be commonly held in church. No fault there. It's just my life experience demanded a little broader look at things.
Mm-hmm.
Question? We had a great description of what happened up until 4 days after. Now my question is, how long did it take you to get back to normalcy? What did you do? Did you work? How long before you went back to work, and did you stay in the logging industry?
Are you, if you're asking me, now Mike went back to doing, you know, big timber logging.
I think he was asking you in particular
Me?
when...
Well, you know, it was kind of like getting thrown off the horse. You know, you got to get back on. I actually went back and did a little bit of woods work with quite a bit of trepidation, you know, being out there, even going so far as to go out by myself. You know, I went armed, as if that would help, but yeah, but I, you know, transitioned into working around bigger operations, molding mill, the paper mill, some things of that sort of.
Another question?
It's been 40 years, so how have the original 7 of you that were out there, how have you all adjusted? Have some of you done better than others?
Yes, some of us have done better than others.
Does that include you?
Yeah, I make no claim to having mastered any of this. It's an ongoing process, is what I'm trying to say.
And what about your families?
I think it's been an ongoing process for the families too. And also for them, it sort of paralleled the changes in attitude that the community and the public had. You know, it was much more ridiculed at that time, but there's far greater acceptance today than back then. So it's definitely changed a lot in that regard. Like I said, we've reached the tipping point where seriously, you know, the debunkers and the skeptics are the kooks. These are cranks. These are people who are kind of irrational in their approach to life.
So, John, what about you? How did it affect your life? Was it in a big way, and does it still affect your life?
It affected my life quite a bit at the time, you know. Like I said, I'd say for a couple of weeks, but then I got out of there, you know, and I went someplace where nobody knew me, nobody knew about that story, and you know, and I never told anybody about it for many years. I just distanced myself away from it, and it wasn't until I was, like Travis was saying, the people are more receptive to this sort of thing, you know. They're not such doubters and disbelievers as they used to be. So, I started noticing that. I know I wasn't going to be up here and a bunch of people, calling me a liar. That's why I left that town, 'cause I'd say 4 out of 5 people, didn't believe it at all. And you knew it. They let you know it, and so.
Were you surprised by the media attention and then the movie?
Well, yeah, both. The media attention, yeah, I never could adjust to that. I mean, if you just walk out the house and there they are, or anywhere you went, they want, and it's just, I didn't like that at all, It didn't appeal to me at all. And the movie, I didn't really have anything to do with the movie, and I have to credit that to people like Travis and Mike that got out and just kept telling the truth, that, they kept an interest in it, in this event that happened, that.
And what about you, Mike? Were you surprised? How did you react to the media attention and then the movie coming out?
I've never really liked that kind of attention. I've kind of stayed behind things. I went with Travis to on the speaking tours for about 3 years, and I never got used to it. I don't think Travis did either. But I for myself, I just disliked it so much that it was real hard for me to do it at all. And I guess about 17 years ago, I quit, and I never did it again.
On the Geraldo Rivera clip, for example, it seemed like at least, did it feel good to at least be able to speak your truth, to get your voice out there and be heard?
Who are you asking?
Like you, for instance, it seemed like, because you had a lot to say there.
Yeah, I've got a lot to say. I don't know how much of it was appropriate.
It's a family show.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, I have had a ton of conversation with Phil Klass. I felt like I was married to him or something. I mean, you talk about argument. I had more argument with him, more letters, more conversations. It fill volumes. It literally does. In fact, Jennifer Steiner has collected a bunch of that, and what she's collected is already a couple of volumes. And it's just Phil Klass and me. And one thing I don't think people know about at all is that I kind of gained a rapport with Phil a couple of years before he died. I had always been sending him Christmas cards and birthday cards, always with religious themes, just to goad him, He started sending me jokes, like cartoons that he made up, and he wasn't an artist, so he would have somebody in his office, make it. And he was not a comedian either.
Why do you think he pursued you with so much intensity?
I do not know. I think he just picked me out. Like, he assumed that I was the instigator of the hoax or something. That was one of his first scenarios, and one that he never really let go of. In fact, at one time, he called me. He alluded to the possibility that I had done a lot of other things too, and he just thought I was a bad guy.
Another question?
Yes, please. On the theme of hoax or being liars, and John having to leave the community because he felt uncomfortable, 40 years later now, I'm just curious, Travis and Mike, how do you feel the community you're living in, say Snowflake, which I visited Travis a few years ago, if you had to estimate the acceptance of the community of your experience, how would you characterize that acceptance today, 40 years later?
Well, I can only react to, obviously, I'm the only one that's still living there, and these guys, still go there, but it definitely has changed dramatically. I can only comment on the people that actually come up and interact with me in some way, and all the negative's gone. You know, almost everything is positive. Almost every day that I go out, somebody will, you know, just want to shake my hand or say, you know, I always supported you. And then I think, oh, where were you back then? But, but you know, that, you know, they're willing to come out and say so in front of people, and it's changed a lot in that respect. People, like the deputy in Taylor that took the Phil Klass's bribe offer to Steve. Steve was, Phil Klass attempted to bribe him with a $10,000 offer to discredit this incident. But the offer was carried by Deputy Jim Click. Well, his son saw me at the post office, and we had a conversation there that was, you know, very interesting. And that was one thing that made it very difficult. Philip Klass never denied that, you know, and that's just incredible that if he really thinks he's dug up the inside story on this, why would he need to bribe someone? You know, Steve never accepted the bribe at the time it was first offered, and then years later, he actually found Steve, tracked him down, even though Steve had changed his name and moved to Texas. He flew to Texas, took Steve out to dinner, and again tried to get him to accept this $10,000 offer, and Steve still didn't do it.
Steve would have had to have passed a test.
Oh yeah, that would be a difficult situation for Steve, because even if he decided to take the money, he's still going to be challenged to take a lie detector test. Okay, now, you know, prove that what you're saying is true, which of course wouldn't have been true. But it was, you know, over the years, things have changed dramatically. I'm sure there are some people who sit back and, you know, think things, but nobody says it anymore. Mm-hmm. Like I say, we've reached the tipping point. The people who are negative want to keep quiet because there's somebody going to turn on them and read them the riot act, you know, because people are much more assertive about the support.
Why did you stay, Travis, even with all that negativity?
Well, you know, I wasn't going to run. I wasn't going to be run off. And, you know, the best reply is to just live my life the best way I can and let people see what kind of person I really am. And I think that's been part of the recovery, is that people, you know, see that none of this stuff. Plus, you know, the real facts, you know, are slowly filtering out, you know. You can grab onto all kinds of things to try to explain it away. Oh, they were all just drunk or whatever. But, you know, they find out there's nothing to support any of these theories. But here a while back, some kid came on the internet and was claiming to be the sheriff's nephew, and he had the whole inside story, and he just had a whole bunch of stuff made up. But he went online for his 15 minutes of fame, and before I ever even heard about it, everybody on there just jumped on his case because they knew that this stuff wasn't true. He began with the story that the crew met with the sheriff and his men at the Red Robin Diner. And then they make the point that the Red Robin Diner didn't exist for 20 years after the incident. And he goes, oh, I meant the Red Onion. Same thing, 20 years, you know. But, you know, a whole bunch of stuff like that just did not add up.
Did you experience that, Mike, a lot of negativity in this area? And is that what caused you to leave as well?
Well, I didn't really leave. Show Low was just up the hill a ways. And everybody in Show Low is in the same situation as they are in Snowflow. It's just kind of the same thing. I found that things did change, exactly as he said. I was in the tree business, domestic tree business, for the last 20 years, and during that time, things really changed in the same way he described. The first year I was in the tree business is the domestic tree service work. There were a lot of people that once they found out who I was, they shied away. They didn't want me to finish a job, or they wouldn't hire me again. And I didn't like that too well. I mean, it was pretty bad. But over time, it's just like today, I don't even think about that anymore because it's been a long time since anybody said anything to me or acted negative to me at all. I think also, I was reading some statistics in a book, a UFO type book here the other day. Can't remember what it was called, but it had a lot of Gallup polls in it. And some of the latest Gallup polls show that the believers now outnumber the skeptics by quite a bit. In fact, worldwide, there is 5 UFO believers for every 1 fundamentalist Christian, according to the polls.
Do you have a question back there?
First, I just want to say, Travis, thank you so much for bringing these guys, some of the last of the living crew here, to give a more rounded, dynamic witness to what happened. You know, I've heard stories that Phil Klass was overpaid agent shill of one of the 3-letter agencies, and the reason he hounded you guys so much was because he had a contract to fulfill and he was failing at it. Do you think there's any evidence of that or any truth to that?
Oh, yes, there's definitely evidence to that. I came into possession through the Freedom of Information Act, his FBI file. After he passed away, it was legal to have access to that. And there's some very interesting stuff in there. Basically, the FBI didn't like him at all. Said that he was basically not in possession of his faculties, that he was very irrational and those sorts of things, because he was attacking the FBI for even investigating reports. And all they were doing is saying, how do you handle this, you know? And so, but the real smoking gun in that file was a memo from J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI, to the director of the Central Intelligence Agency at a time when they were being criticized because they didn't cooperate much, you know, didn't communicate much. But they were turning the investigation of Philip Klass over to the CIA. And this is, you know, standard CIA recruitment tactic. You get something on somebody, and then you get their cooperation. So CIA didn't turn him into a skeptic, but he was a useful idiot because he had, in connection with his job, compromised national security, revealing classified information. They had the leverage to direct his activities and fund them. So that's why a guy on an editor's salary can offer $10,000 to one of our crew.
Mm-hmm. Mike, having talked to him so much, you think that was the case also?
I definitely think that. In fact, I accused him more than once of working for the government. He never denied it. One of those times was on Larry King Live. I didn't actually accuse him of it, but I picked words that everybody thought meant that. I said, you know, Philip Klass is actually a UFO debunker from Washington, D.C., which was all true. I wouldn't say he worked for the government. Yeah, disinformation specialist. And, but it wasn't an actual direct accusation. It's just that Phil lived in Washington, D.C. And I think he was working for the government, but I didn't know. But those kind of comments, he never denied.
So I wanted to ask, you all now are kind of champions for this topic. When people talk about UFOs and credible cases, they talk about you all and your lie detector tests and the credibility that you all have for people. You know, that's why this is going on, and people feel so strongly towards you all. How do you feel about that, especially since this is something you did not seek? You could go ahead and start. You didn't seek to become a UFO champion
well, you know, I only started this, about 3 years ago, something like that. That only started, I've only done it a couple times, you know. I've only got to talk in front of people. It was just been in that period of time that I realized, you know, that it was that way. And a lot of people here have had their own experiences, and I think that's why there's so many people that believe in it. I don't feel myself to be a champion of something because I really haven't put that much into it, So, I don't really have that feeling,
Mm-hmm.
But as for people believing it now, I worked at a very large retail store in Sholo, and they, a lot of the customers from going to those, they recognize me, or that show on Paranormal Witness. Anyway, a lot of people would recognize me, and everyone I talked to was really positive about it, It was, so I never really, I left and got away from when it was negative and snowflake, and I stayed away from it for a lot of years. And when I did come back, it had changed around, so I never really experienced the negativity so much that these guys had ran into.
Mm-hmm. What about you, or we'll go with Mike next, if that's okay. How do you feel about that? And that, people, I don't think it's overstepping to say that people here admire, you all and what you've been through and how you've come to speak about what happened to you. How do you feel about that attention?
Well, I recognize that is the case, but I don't know what to feel about that. It feels kind of weird, but I do know that, in fact, it really hit home to me the other day. I was listening to this Coast to Coast show with George Norrie, I guess. I started listening to it here a couple of weeks ago, and I've only listened to it maybe 4 times now, but I was surprised one day when this guy named Jimmy Church, he was standing in for Norrie, and he had a guy on as a guest who was a UFO researcher and was one of the people compiling these UFO reports. He was talking about how many thousands they had now. And Jimmy Church said, well, I just don't think we have any need to compile any more cases. He says, we already have our Travis. And that's when it hit me.
What about you, Travis? You live this, especially since you've retired from logging, pretty much almost on a daily basis.
Well, I was nicknamed the reluctant celebrity because, it's never been anything I, liked in that sense. I made the comment that, there's all this downside and we can gripe and complain about all this stuff. And then I say, along with the burden, comes a certain responsibility. Sure, you have to look for the good in things in order to just deal with it, to survive it, to cope. You try to look on the bright side as best you can. So why not accept the positive? We certainly have to accept the negative, and did for many years. So, the best we can do is just try to make something good come of it.
Mm-hmm. And I know for audiences, one of the great things is to come to these sort of events and express appreciation to you all, especially in the rare opportunity to be able to be in the same room with you all. And I think, did people do you feel that they are champions for this topic and this?
Thank you. Thank you.
So I know a lot of people very much appreciate that you guys are, because I think it does take a lot of strength you could just hide from it and stay hidden from it all. And I feel like probably, and you guys could speak to this, you feel like hiding from it sometimes. But, Mike says he has. But for us all, I know we feel strongly that it's great when someone does have that strength, and we want to support people who do come forward and show that, hopefully you don't have to be as fearful, because you do have people who support what you do.
Well, you know, ufologists have always been characterized by the skeptic as being blind believers that just believed everything. Even back in the days of Hynek and APRO and like that, they would explain away up to 90% of the cases and reports that they had. It's always important to not let what happened to us become a blanket justification for some things that, you know, frankly, we do think is nonsense. That there is a little bit of a lunatic fringe to this, just like there is to anything. You look at politics. You know,
There's one of the lunatics.
There's a lunatic fringe to politics, to acting. Look at the actors and those personalities in the tabloids, you know. So, you know, I started giving a talk about how to evaluate these kinds of reports. And I began my talk with, how many people believe everything that you heard at this UFO conference? And nobody raised their hand. And that was a good starting point to say, okay, well, how do we know what's good and what's not, you know? And it's not like the UFO debunkers try to characterize that it's a bunch of crazy people or liars, you know. I think it's very often people who are sincere but just mistaken for some reason. So one thing that I think by sticking to documentation and the aspects of this that we can prove is to sort of raise the bar in terms of what should be offered to the general public in terms of, you know, backing up the contention that this is actually happening. This is real. It's just, you know, we don't want to be trapped into supporting things that, you know, really aren't of the same nature. So in that sense, it's another way that we can make some good come of it. There's a lot of people who have experienced things in their own private lives, feel embarrassed to talk about it. They don't have the kind of documentation that fortunately we have, so they can't, they're afraid to speak out publicly. It's legitimate, but they have no way to, you know, defend themselves. And so it helps them to, in a personal sense, be vindicated or validated by other people's experience, even though they don't plan on, you know, having any public recognition or going public with it or anything like that. So there's a variety of ways to try to make something good come of this. And there are aspects of my experience that I don't talk about because those are the parts that I can't document. And there were some that I kind of held back on until I did have the documentation. Because I think that's the mission, is to try to carry to the public and to the media the reality of this, and with good reason.
Mm-hmm. Mike, did you want to speak along those lines at all about, you had nodded that, yeah, I tried to hide from this a bit in the past.
I don't, he said it all. He's a speaker. Ask me something in particular, I can answer.
Okay. So now, I mean, were you reluctant to come to, for instance, this weekend or this event? And if so, why? And I guess what could we all do, or people out there who support you do, to help maybe people with similar experiences feel comfortable?
Yeah, he was reluctant.
Yeah, I came to this conference for the first time because Travis came and asked me to.
But he wouldn't give me an answer for an hour.
Yeah, it took a while.
Uh-huh.
But that's why. I've been reluctant, I admit that. How about you, John? Do you have to twist your arm?
The reason I don't, you know, I would go to more of them. It's just that I drive truck for a living. I'm all over the United States, you know, and I can't just stop and fly home or whatever, you know. I would like to spend more time with these guys, and I like, if for nothing else, just to spend more time with these guys, you know, and Kenny and Steve, you know. That guy showed me 5 minutes.
Good point. You know, people are always saying, you know, do you ever see your buddies anymore? What are your buddies doing? I'm saying, well, we weren't a group of buddies at the time, but, you know, we really ought to be. You know, we had to share an experience that should have bonded us, and we really just scattered to the four winds and didn't really. I mean, Steve hid out for 30 years with living under a different name. So it was high time that we, you know, relate better.
And our numbers are dwindling. Yeah. 2 of us aren't here anymore. There's only 5. Mm-hmm. So that makes it more important.
Mike, do you think there is an important message, or do you think there is something that maybe you've learned and others can learn from your experience?
Yes, I do. I actually have tons to say on that.
We got a few minutes.
I don't know where to start. I've learned an awful lot about people. And most of my new philosophy is, you know, I find more things better about people than I do bad, but I've also found some more bad things about people. I guess, you know, it tips the balance and it's for the better. It's kind of a slow process. You know, this earth evolves very slowly. And it seems like we should be able to make progress much faster, to me. It really does. We should somehow make it quicker. It's too slow. And
when I guess, Travis, you know, having been the one who, you know, being in this field and having been the one who interact with whatever it was you interacted with, do you feel that way? Do you feel like there's a message that you were given, or especially along the evolution of humanity?
Well, you know, the progress that Mike's referring to isn't in what a lot of people might assume that he's referring to progress in quote-unquote solving the UFO mystery. To me, it's not a mystery. But the progress being to change the popular perception, the attitude of media and government towards this. And that's crucially what this whole thing is all about, in my humble opinion. You know, I have a philosophy, a personal theory, that there's this extreme, the two extremes, that the one that the debunkers say, well, if this was real, they would land on the White House lawn and say, here we are, and it would all be in the open. And I make the point that with their technology, they could do everything they're doing here and remain completely undetected. There would be no ufology. So the degree that we see them and perceive them, I believe, is deliberate and measured, and with the intention being to gradually accustom us in a way that's not going to be disruptive, like it would be if tomorrow that was something so undeniable happened that the whole world knew about it. That would be destructive, I believe. So it's got to be gradual, and I think what we're doing here is contributing to that process to increase that awareness to where this open acknowledgement of a galactic community can be taken in stride without, you know, destroying all these human institutions and beliefs and whatnot.
Oh, I think that's a good note to end things. We're pretty much out of time, and I think everybody here appreciates what you all have done to move us towards that progression. Thank you.